First of all, welcome back. We've got some more stuff to talk about. I want to talk about ratios. I want to talk about roast profiles and this new thing that's entered into the world of coffee, anaerobics, co-fermentations, as we pull shots of espressos with those different kinds of coffees. First of all, when you get into building your recipe for your drinks and your shots of espresso, personally, I like to use ratios. Ratios are the best way for me to understand how much coffee to water I'm using, whether it's pour over, French press, or espresso. I typically follow a 1 to 2.5 to a 1 to 3 ratio. In the past, when I started in coffee 20 years ago, there were rippers, like 1 to 1. But back then, a lot of the coffees were dark roast. And darker roasted coffees, because they go through this longer roast development time in the roaster, you're breaking down the cell wall structure, making it more porous, making it more soluble. So you don't need a big ratio for a dark roasted coffee. And typically, your dark roasted coffees sit well in your cappuccinos and your lattes. So if you do a 1 to 1 or a 1 to 1.5 for your darker roast, that's fine. Now, if you're drinking a really high quality dark roast coffee, I would shoot for a 1 to 2, personally. So let's talk about your light roast, your dark roast. So your dark roast coffees tend to have more solubility in water, so you need less water to extract what you want out of the coffee because it extracts pretty fast. So a smaller ratio. Your lighter roasted coffees tend to be a lot more dense, less soluble than your dark roasted coffees or even your medium roasted coffees. So you might want to push it with a little more water, so a bigger ratio. I tend to go, especially with the 58 millimeter baskets, I typically do 18.5 to 19 gram dose, and I shoot for that 45 to 50 grams out. So one of those big boy shots. Typically your lighter roasted coffees are going to be those coffees that have more to offer, like as far as flavor, aromatics, florals, sweetness. And a lot of those flavors, especially those natural processed light roasted coffees, those flavors tend to be a lot closer together when you use those lower ratios. So using a bigger ratio, more water, you can spread those flavors out and you can experience those flavors a lot more. Now let's talk about your anaerobic coffees and those co-fermentation coffees. Now these coffees at the producer level, whether it's in Colombia, Ethiopia, or wherever, these coffees are going through an extended period of fermentation. So that cell wall structure is weakening before we even get it as roasters. And then when we get those anaerobic coffees as roasters, we're weakening that cell wall structure even more. Whether it's light roast or medium roast, we're still weakening that cell wall structure. So let's say, for instance, a light roasted anaerobic fermentation coffee is going to be more soluble than, say, a light roasted washed Ethiopian coffee. So you would need two things. You would need a bigger ratio because you have big flavors in those anaerobic coffees. So you want to space those flavors out. So you're not going to shoot for that ratio that you would find with a dark roasted coffee, but you want to shoot for a lower time. So typically a coarser grind to give you a lower time, say in the 20 to 22, 23 time zone, but having that coarser grind will account for that weaker cell wall structure from the farm and then from the roastery, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So with your anaerobic fermentation coffees that are light roasted or even medium roasted, you want a coarser grind, but you want a bigger ratio to account for those big flavors, to spread those flavors out. Going coarser will put you in that 20 to 22 to 23 range. Maybe even push it closer to 24, but I wouldn't go past that. So you really have to know and understand what your grinder can do so you can kind of understand those ratios, whether it's light roasted, dark roasted, medium roasted, anaerobic fermentation, or what have you. Hopefully all that makes sense, but if not, you can always find me down in the comments. Throw your questions, throw your comments. If you have any questions about the different kinds of coffees out there that you want to learn more about, just let me know. All right, peace, twice.